Hi everyone. I am back to talk about another piece of theory. If you missed my video on uh, what makes a strong unit and the three pillars of competitive play, feel free to review that. But in this video, I'm planning on kind of discussing a passive versus active play and how I define it in my games and how I conceptualize it when I'm deciding how to approach any given turn. I think an understanding of what it means when someone says, you can play passively here, you can play aggressively or defensive or anything like that, understanding what they mean by that, and understanding, how to apply that to your games is a really important way to stretch your capabilities as a player. And I think having these building blocks helps a player kind of approach the game with a mindset that allows pretty tremendous growth. So um, I'm hopeful that once I define these terms, they're going to be pretty useful in kind of talking about how you want to play and how you want to approach the game. Um, Rather than saying, "Hey, are you a blunter? Are you a pusher? Are you defensive, aggressive? How do you like to play? What's your play style?" Having a good understanding of what blunting is, or not, what active play versus passive play looks like, will help you better define that. So, without further ado, passive play is kind of what I'm going to jump into first. Passive play is broken down into a type of play that is focused on scoring points, and using the least resources to do so. Um, there is a specific pattern that I fall into when I am doing passive play, where at the beginning of each turn, I think, um, if I am in passive play, I think through four different kind of steps of how to use my resources. And I try to utilize those resources as efficiently as possible. The first thing that I look at is scoring secondaries. Scoring secondaries, all of these four steps are related to the points on the table. How can we score points? Scoring your secondaries is the most obvious and easiest one to figure out. What units do you need to do it? Where do they need to be? Can they go there while doing something else? That's not as important, but which resources are we going to use to score our secondaries this turn if they are scoreable? Setting those units aside and thinking they have to go do these things next lets you look and say, all right, my next step is I need to stop the opposing primary. Um, this looks like either killing an enemy off their objective or moving a higher OC unit onto their objective. Um, this is, making sure that they are not standing on the circles at the end of your turn. These first two are active things that you have control over on your turn. The third, which is scoring primary, is something that you have to plan and set up for, where you have to think, how am I going to use my resources to score primary on the following turn? Which can look like move blocking the enemy and putting a lone up on an objective, or getting aggressive in one area, or putting a really defensive unit on an objective. The key is that you want to be efficient in these. So at the end of the day, if you set up to score primary, um, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to use as many resources as possible to make sure that you get those 5 points. What it means is you should set up resources in a way where if your opponent denies you and stops you from scoring that primary, it's going to take a lot of resources for them to do, which is going to allow you to slowly build a resource advantage. You want them to dedicate significant resources so that you can build up a material advantage over them. But thinking about how would I like to score primary is important. The final most difficult one is stopping the enemy secondaries. Um, this is usually a late game thing to think about, unless you are unless they have defense stronghold or sabotage up, in which case you can deny that. Usually this is more, hey, we're getting close to the end of the game. We have a few units left. How do I use each unit? Is it most useful for me to go get damage on this last turn, or if they still have Bring It Down in their deck, should I hide my monster so that they don't get that? Or if they still have no prisoners, maybe I shouldn't spawn something because I don't want to give them points. There is really thinking this through at the late game is a way to squeeze a few extra points out of your play. But this is primarily for your resources at the beginning of any given turn to set up for the following command phase or the end of your current turn. You can take each turn step by step, but the keys, there's a few key parts of doing all four of these that help you remain in passive play and do passive play well. The first is that you should achieve this by exposing the least amount of resources possible. So you get better at this by getting a better understanding of how to achieve multiple at the same time with the same unit, how to achieve these without exposing a unit. Your goal is to not give your opponent things to activate into on the following turn while achieving these four things. Sometimes it's not worth it. That is a part of passive play where you can go, I could score primary, but I will have to expose 7 things, or I could stop enemy primary, but I would have to throw away all of my resources on turn 3. In those cases, you make the call that it's not efficient and it's not worth doing. But the key is that we want to always expose the least amount possible when you are in passive play. There's like a fifth, I guess, priority here. You got the 4 scoring, but the fifth is that with any of our remaining units that aren't doing these 4, we should also, if possible, safely remove opposing resources. If they are sitting, if they've committed something to your natural, and you can kill it without exposing your units for your opponent to then kill, do it. Do it every time. If your opponent mispositions and you can uppy downy your unit and catch an angle that can't be killed on the following turn, do that anyway. There is no worry about using your safe resources to get damage. This is how, with these 4 priorities, how are we using our unsafe resources? How are we spending our resources? Because if you're using your resource and it's still completely safe and can't be killed, then you're not really spending it, right? So you should go for those every time. But if you are using it and you think you are going to lose your resources by doing that, by getting one of these 4 steps, then that's when you start to be like, hey, we need to be efficient with this, but this is actually spending and using and exposing this resource. Last key is the opponent should never be able to respond with their full army. I'll go into this a bit more later, but if you reach a point in your passive play where by doing these 4 steps, your opponent is going to use the remainder of their army to attack you, you shouldn't be in passive play anymore. You should switch to active play, because it's inefficient and it's bad use of your skills and your resources to only expose as much as your opponent can use their whole army to kill. If they can use, and to be clear, I'm specifically talking about every unit in their army has to activate to do damage to you. If you have your units exposed and you send 2 things out and they activate, 2/3 of their army and they kill you, that's fine. We just want to make sure that if they are using their whole army to shoot, you can expose more resources and they'll live, right? Because your opponent is already using all their resources. And that's when we would switch into active play, which I will talk about now. So, active play. Active play is the, I guess, alternate way that you can play the game. And, if you're thinking about passive play, at the beginning of each turn, you're thinking about these 4 things and you're thinking about how to achieve them. An active play, that drops down to the third most important thing, which is score points. All 4 of those are included within score points. And it is still important and you are still thinking about it, but it is no longer your topmost priority. Instead, your topmost priority becomes removing enemy resources, and stopping enemy activations. So removing enemy resources is killing your opponent's units. Stopping enemy activations is tagging your opponents with your units, and preventing them from activating. This is the key to active play, is that unlike passive play, you are going to use all of your resources available, that can get any value. They are all going to get value, and they are going to expose themselves to get value. You are going to spend every resource that you can. This is commonly thought of as going like all in, or I guess the metaphor that I like to use is if you're like a captain of a starship and you can send power to your shields or your engines or the med bay or whatever. The active play is all power to guns. We are putting, every resource on the line to do as much damage as possible to cripple our enemy's ability to hit back into us. We can still, as with passive play, you want to get value safely where you can. That is always, if you can destroy enemy units while not being hit back, do that. But the key is that once you reach the level in passive play where you are exposing enough resources that your opponent gets to activate most of their army into you on the following turn, you should just switch into active play and push the rest of your units forward and get value that way as well, right? We are going to focus on improving our board state, and the scoring the points will happen as we do that, right? By improving our board state and getting a material advantage, our points will get better, and it won't be as much of a priority to do otherwise. So when do we switch from passive play to active play? The kind of rule and way that I think about it, I think that there are 3. If you have the opportunity to remove enough of your opponent's resources that your remaining pieces overwhelm what's left of their army, you should go for it. If they can't kill you after you hit them very well, go. This is kind of compounded with what I was saying earlier. The kind of second reason why you should switch from passive to active is if in a passive play line you feel like you have to expose an amount of your army that your opponent's damage is going to be taxed to remove, you should, and specifically, you have to expose enough like value pieces is the way that I phrase it, where if you were to expose a chaff unit that's not doing damage, along with some other things, and your opponent has to shoot a lot to kill this chaff unit, that's fine, even if they're using most of their army to do it. But if you have multiple damage pieces that are exposed to go take objectives or score a secondary, and your opponent is going to be hard pressed to kill those regardless, you should commit the rest of your resources forward to take space as well, because if they are going to be killing value pieces anyway with most of their army, we need to take advantage of that, even if we don't feel like we are going to kill them all the way and run away with the game. We should still fully commit in that space, because even if we are killing a few things and are tagging some things and then they kill a good chunk to the point where we no longer can take, a material advantage and just kill them all and win the game, by exposing all our resources in that way, we are going to set ourselves up to have a better position to move our army and respond to their response. Whereas if we were passive and we only put those, resources forward that we needed to, and the opponent killed those, it we would have a similar problem where we're running out of resources, but we would be in a worse position to take advantage of that. The final time that you should switch to active play is if you feel very confident that passive play is going to lose you the game. This is just for armies that are trading poorly, or are not, gonna do what they need to by the end of the game. There becomes instances where you need to commit the rest of your resources. If someone puts a big unit in front of you and if you don't remove this unit, it's going to walk over you. You have to just commit all of your resources, and your opponent can kind of bait you into active play in that case. And then you are fully committing all your resources to try and do damage. There are also times where you have to switch from active play to passive play. So this could be a situation where if you fully commit, like in the second example of why you would switch from passive to active, which is my opponent's going to have to commit into high value targets anyway, so I want to just commit all my units to get value where I can that won't be punished for. Then you realize after that, oh look, I think I'm actually going to lose the material war here. You can switch back to passive play now that you've removed a lot of opposing resources. Maybe you've limited where they can get on the board. Now you start, scattering onto objectives, standing in people's way to score, and you start focusing all your energy back on how can I score points, because I'm no longer going to remove enough enemy resources to run away with points just naturally by them not scoring any by being dead. Instead, I'm probably going to die myself, so I'm going to scatter to the winds and try and, throw resources here and there to score points. And hopefully you removed enough at the top end that you can, swing away with your points from there. These two playstyles are really important to understand and really have a good understanding of. Generally, some archetypes and lists are better at maintaining passive play for longer periods of time, versus some lists being better at maintaining active play for longer periods of time. A slow gun line will spend the majority of the game in passive play. They don't have the ability to have a turn where they commit all of their resources in a way that's going to cripple the opponent unless their opponent gives them that chance. So they will keep an eye out for opportunities where they can go into active play if their opponent offers them that, those resources, and goes active on them. They can, in response, go active. But if that is impossible, then generally you're going to be trading and it's going to have a stabler, score. But a player who prefers, or a list that I guess is built to stay in active play for longer, is going to be more volatile. It's going to be like a fast melee army that is going to be putting pressure on from turn 2, maybe even turn 1, although that's rarer now. And in doing so, that is going to have a lot more variability built in to the score. So understanding these two playstyles, understanding when they're necessary and when to switch them, is really important. Knowing one of them really well and being very good at one type of play will make you a good player that's capable of winning GTs and larger tournaments. But to be a great player and really, make yourself one of the best, you have to know both, because in any given game, even if you build a list that's built for passive play, if you can't notice an advantage and push it, um, you are going to lose games where you should have sent your army forward. And similarly, if you are really good at active play, you are going to dominate a lot of people you play against, where you're going to pressure them and they're going to fall to pieces. But then there's going to be instances where they start to come out the other side and you don't have the skills to score the remaining points to push whatever, some points lead you have on the first few turns through to a small win by the end of the game. Instead, it'll be either you get 20s or you get zeros, right? So having the skills to play both is really important, and developing both types of play. And at the beginning of each turn, thinking, okay, do I need to switch into active play? No. Let's stay in passive play. Let me check each of my boxes. I'll be good to go. If so, like, having that mindset is really important. When you think about it in a team setting, you have the top players who have preferences about these play styles, where maybe a top player prefers passive play, and so they will make lists that are good at passive play. In general, they might be known as a blunter in that case. In reality, the list is more of the blunter. It's just the player is good at that type of list, and so is playing it, right? There are certain lists that can kind of do both, where you can push it into, like a player that prefers active play more might play the exact same list as someone who prefers passive play more and will play it more aggressively. But in general, it's more of a list question than a player question, because top players should be able to do both. And even just players in general, there will be times where both are applicable and you find yourself unconsciously slipping into one type of play or the other. But knowing the difference and when it's important to switch is going to help you position your units proactively to do so. Knowing that at some point you're likely to switch into active play might make you set up your resources more aggressively so that on the following turn you can switch into active play faster. I've played against a lot of people who, after playing me on my like Invasion Fleet Swarm or Unending Swarm or any of my lists that are not as high in damage, their response is, I just should have pushed into you earlier. And that is a sign of knowing active play. If you recognize your opponent's resources and what they can handle, and you recognize that they aren't enough to kill you, you need to know how to push your units forward aggressively, and get as much value as you can while standing on the circles in the middle of the table. Because if you just trade back and forth with an opponent who is making their list to be passive, you are playing into their game plan. So recognizing what type of play are they best at? What type of play am I best at? Am I better than them at that type of play? Are they better than me? And can we, stay in that realm? Do I need to upset their plan? If they're better at active and I'm better at passive, I need to make their active play seem really unappealing. So how can I set up my units in a way that makes it really awkward for them to full commit their army into me and get the value that they want to get? Yeah, if you have any questions about this split, feel free to leave a comment or reach out. But I'm hopeful that this is going to kind of help people drive an understanding of the type of play that they want to pursue, but also be aware of both in any given game that they're playing. Thanks.